So I would like to introduce our next speakers. In addition to Advait and Chloe, we have Revthi, who is currently working at RBC as a performance analyst. She has several years of software experience and is a graduate from the York Master of Business Analytics program and is former Vector Scholarship in Artificial Intelligence recipient. I would like to introduce Stephen Guo, who is a machine learning engineer from Cohere AI. And he is also a graduate from one of Vector's, as a former Vector Scholarship and AI recipient from the Master of Applied Computing program. So welcome Revthi and Stephen as well to our panel discussion today. Great, so the first question I would like to pose to all of you is that all of you work in different sectors and in different types of roles within AI. So Chloe, you're a data scientist. At Advait, you work on kind of a customer engineer facing side of things. Revthi, you work in a performance analyst role, and Stephen, you work in machine learning engineering. So could you please give a brief overview of the role you currently work in and how your role fits within the context of your team and organization? For example, who are the team members that you work with on a regular basis? And how does your role relate to some of your organization's broader goals in AI? So if it might help give a little bit more context, maybe also the part of the AI ML pipeline you work on. So Chloe, originally you had the slide of like deployment and results. So perhaps you could speak to your role and how that fits within your team first.
Yeah, for sure. So I think I briefly talked about how within the data science and advanced analytics team, we have different groups. So there's advanced analytics, there's the data and integration team, there's a product development team. These groups were only defined relatively recently. So for a while, our data scientists were kind of involved in the entire process, but we're hoping to kind of have these more defined groups. How it fits within the organizational goals. So like the goals of Unity Health Toronto are really to like improve patient outcomes. So either by reducing mortality or improving like kind of like hospital efficiencies, if there's ways to kind of like reduce costs, for example. So definitely like any of our advanced analytics projects need to kind of like relate back to that in one way or another. And in terms of where in the data science pipeline I'm involved, moving forward, I've been focusing mostly on like the modeling and evaluation aspect, but for a while I was spending a lot of time in kind of the earlier stages, kind of like data polling, data preparation, data extraction.
Great, thank you, Chloe. Why don't we move over to Stephen? You can share a little bit about your role.
Yeah, so my company Cohere, so we try to serve large-scale transformer models to other companies so they can do downstream tasks. And our model can be up to billions of parameters. So as a machine learning engineer, my work is mostly trying to develop the training framework that supports the training of models of such scale. And so I work with research scientists, other machine learning engineers as well. My work involves developing the training framework, but also involves improving the architecture of our language models, which are mostly transformer based. And thirdly, I think I'm often involved in the inference side as well, because to serve, to serve such a large model, we need infrastructure as well as model compression and optimizations for the inference to be feasible. So yeah, that's mostly what I do. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Stephen. Over to you, Revthi.
Thanks, Joanna, for the introduction. So I work as an analyst with the performance management team. So we work under the payment and trade operations and the business performance suite of things. On my day-to-day, I usually handle a lot of capacity management, incentive programs, performance metrics, and analytics. So I end up working with multiple teams within payment and trade operations, their senior managers or leaders, to help them, to drive continuous improvements within their team, help them make those give them those actionable insights and help them make strategic operational decisions based on those. I guess I'd work a lot with data manipulation, exploration, but majority of my time would be in the analytics part of things, just sort of getting those insights and communicating effectively with those insights. I guess it sort of plays into part of our BC's goal to, use AI and analytics as much as possible. They've done a lot of partnerships with different universities and colleges to sort of promote that. So this kind of falls under that. I work with most of the payment processing teams. So that's sort of my role in the team. So I hope that answers your question.
Great, thank you. Over you to Advait.
Sure. So my role is what we internally will call a customer engineer. So basically, I work with customers who are going to be on Google Cloud or would like to be on Google Cloud to understand how you're actually going to implement machine learning at scale on Google Cloud infrastructure, right? So it can be as simple as an organization that has very little machine learning expertise, and there's a bit of an education step involved in there, as well as probably looking at more simple tools like ML APIs or AutoML, all the way to far more sophisticated AI research teams that live inside of banks, as an example, where they're talking about scaling, large models, perhaps to millions of customers at real-time serving scale. So there's a whole engineering challenge that goes along with that. That's really external to some extent from the actual modeling piece.
Great, thank you. So let's talk next about the secret sauce required to be successful in each of your various roles that I'm sure a lot of our audience is curious about today. We can focus on both technical skills, so you can talk about programming languages or what have you, as well as the non-technical skills. So for example, it's important to pitch to business leaders or teamwork. So what strengths do you find most critical to your success in your current roles? And perhaps what is a skill you didn't expect to use in your everyday work, but you find is really critical to doing your job well? So maybe we'll start with Stephen.
Yeah, so I think first and foremost to be successful in AI and ML is to have a good fundamental of the theories. For me, I graduated from U of T. I think the course was 411, Introduction to ML. I think to this day it's still the most important course. If you grasp the fundamental concepts well, it will help you in any other kind of AI related work that you do. And I think another thing to me is to try to get involved in projects that give you hands-on experience, whether you start your own or contribute to an open source project. There's a lot of them that use AI models to do some task. For example, for me, I'm really into chatbot. I use language models to implement chatbot. And so yeah, I think to me it's the theory plus the hands-on experience. Yeah.
Great, thank you. How about you, Chloe?
For technical skills, like I don't think there's like a set number of like programming languages you should know. I think just knowing one really well, but also being able to learn others if ever you need like on the job. I think that's a very common skill that is pretty useful. Non-technical skills, definitely communication, because you're talking a lot, you're interacting with different groups. So whether it's with your fellow data scientists, data analysts, or with maybe ETL developer, software developer, end user, it's different people are talking to, so you may have to adjust the language. A skill that I'm using a lot that I didn't expect, I think giving a lot of presentations. That's not something I thought would happen a lot. So for those of you who are in grad school, like definitely take those opportunities to practice. And version control, know how to use Git. That was not something I was formally trained in, but then I came to start working and it's everywhere.
Great response. Thank you, Chloe. Over you to Advait.
Sure. I guess from a technical perspective, the biggest thing I can contribute to this conversation is that there's a key difference between the code you created for research and experimentation and what actually goes into production. And for those of you who are coming from programs that are very much on the research side of things or learning the modeling side of things, that's a great piece. But then there's a whole practicality of serving scaling that may not necessarily be addressed by every single program. And that's going to be something that you're going to either learn on the job or on your own time. The other piece that I'll add, and this may be a little more tailored to my type of role, is understanding the business context of the problem you're trying to solve. I'm often speaking with executives who are trying to solve a business problem. They're not talking about modeling. Modeling is just really the means to an end. And what it also means is that I could be talking about fraud detection in the morning. I could be talking about plant optimization and mining in the afternoon. I could be talking about chatbots in a telco space, all in the course of a single workday. So there's an unfortunate amount of context switching and understanding the business problem that's relevant, specifically in my type of role where we're really customer facing.
Great, that's a great response. I know a lot of students in the audience are, making that transition between the business and more technical side of things, and those will be very helpful tips. And last but not least, over to you, Revthi.
For me, I always suggest you should know SQL for sure. I use it across multiple platforms. Other than that, any one programming language, learn the basics and the foundations of how coding really works really well, and then you can pick up any other language you want. Other than that, I suggest knowing any visual analytical tools. So for me, that's Tableau. That's something I learned from my master's in business analytics. And I use Tableau almost every day for multiple reporting and just even analyzing data. I can make it really easy. Other than that, in terms of non-technical skills, I would have to say a lot of effective communication depending on who your audience is. So it can be large, small, it can be varied even within those. So that's really important, because otherwise you can go on for half an hour explaining whatever you did and then nobody understands anything, and they come back to you with like some 20 questions, and you don't want that. So I think that's something I learned to perfect over time. Other than that, active learning, that's something I had to consciously take an effort to understand how to do that. And it's very important because I can easily say most like 80% of my month, I'm just learning new things. And then 20%, the rest of the days, I'm more comfortable doing what I know, but there's so much learning to do every single day.
Great, thank you so much. It seems across from all four of you, communication is really key, especially communicating to different stakeholders. So it's not so straightforward as just the technical piece. So that's important to note. Another question I have for all of you, what are some of the most valuable skills and competencies that you learned in your master's programs that are applicable to your current work, and that you would recommend to our audience today to build throughout their programs while they're still in school? So maybe we'll start off with Revthi this time.
I would stick to my answer. For me, Tableau is one of the main things, but I was already comfortable with multiple programming languages because of my IT engineering background. But if you're looking for banks, almost every bank uses SAS and Python a lot. So those would be two skills that also I improved during my master's program. So Tableau and SAS and Python.
Great, thank you. How about you, Stephen?
Yeah, to me, if you want to pursue a career as a machine learning engineer, I think it's your ability to use any kind of framework like TensorFlow or PyTorch to effectively manipulate tensors, or with NumPy. So any kind of models, doesn't matter what kind of model you work on, you will need that fundamental skill. So yeah, that's the one for me.
Great. How about you, Advait?
Yeah, I would say the MMAI program is a little different than many of the other more engineering focused ones, in that there's both the engineering or the modeling side of things, as well as a very clear focus on business context. So depending on your background, one half of that program is going to be a lot more relevant to you than the other. Having come from consulting, I was very much so used to the business side of things, and having consulted in the ML space, I definitely knew something about ML. I just wanted to develop my technical depth far more and understand the state of the art. The one thing I wish the program had that it did not have, which I'll add into here, is that focus on, well, how do I actually productionize this for massive scale? And I think I've kind of echoed that a couple of times so far today. So the practical engineering side of things, I think, is something that we also need to make sure we're addressing.
Great, thank you. And over to you, Chloe.
Yeah, so from my master's, like definitely all like the technical skills that I learned from my classes, but one thing that was also really useful is like the network that I built during my master's. So maybe this is very specific to healthcare and data science, but it's a small group of people, and like once you meet them, you kind of like meet all of them. So I know at Vector there's like quite a few people who are working in ML and healthcare. So if you're interested in getting into that, definitely reach out to them. You know, ask them what they're working on, like who they're collaborating with.
Yeah, that's a great tip. And networking is always important. So now I'll move on to the next question, which kind of talks about your corporate culture and the environment in which you work. So as I mentioned earlier, some of you work in health. Stephen, you're at a startup. So there are different corporate cultures, different corporate structures, and there might be different regulatory contexts. For example, in health, I imagine there are a few more policies and barriers to implementing some of these changes rather than a startup. So could you speak a little bit to your corporate culture and describe the environment you work, maybe your reporting structure or what that day-to-day is like? And if you have any advantages or challenges you want to share as well, you could talk about those also. So Advait, since you're not on mute, I'll start with you.
Sure. So I guess a lot is publicly available in terms of what Google is like as an organization. That being said, it really depends on the type of role you have, because your experience at Google is going to be somewhat different, right? So if you're in an engineering type role, or if you're in a core product development type role, it's kind of the standard Silicon Valley trope of what corporate culture looks like. In my case, being customer facing rather than consumer facing, there's a slight shift, right? The culture and the way you act is somewhat tailored based off of your customer, not really on Google itself. So there's some differences in terms of being far more embedded in your customer rather than your own culture to some extent.
Great, thank you. How about you, Chloe?
So I'd say that for us, like as I've alluded before, like it's a pretty small field. So like once you know people, you kind of like run into the same crowds of people again. I'd say that for my project, it feels like there's a bit more ownership. Like a lot of us are kind of like there from the very beginning to the very end, and we're working very closely with our end users, which I think it's nice that you can see something, you know, from the very beginning to the very end. But it's also, you might feel like you're kind of like spread out a bit too thin, and you can't really focus on one aspect. I mean, one of the biggest disadvantages of working in healthcare is that you're working with the hospital IT infrastructure, which is not always the best. So yeah.
That's good to know. How about you, Revthi?
I think I want to stress on the work-life balance. So everyone I know, at least most of the people I know at work, we all have good work-life balance, with also enough flexibility depending on whatever personal situations you might have. They're quite understanding. And I think I noticed a lot of resources, well-established paths to access those resources as well. So there's a lot of encouragement to learn something new. I'm almost always enrolled in some sort of learning circle or a course. So all those are really great in my opinion. And this could be specific to my team, and the type of role I have, but you know, we're always encouraged to try new ways, try a new tool if we can. So it doesn't feel too restricted on what is already built. There's always so much opportunity to grow and experiment.
Great, thank you. And last but not least, Stephen.
Yeah, so my organization is pretty small. When I joined, it was 5 people. Now we have about 30 people. So I think there are 2 advantages working in a smaller startup. First, it's really a much flatter organization. So it means you can talk to people more easily and get more mentorship from the leaders in your company. So for me, one of our co-founder is the co-author of the original Transformer paper. So I really learned a lot and got a lot of mentorship from that. And I think second thing is it's very flexible and moving very fast. You can start trying new ideas much more easily comparing to a bigger corporate. So yeah, that's the two things for me working for a startup.
Great, thank you. I'll take one more question on pathways before we move into some of the audience questions. So I know many of our audience members who are watching here today are wondering, how did you secure your job? So ultimately, how did you end up where you are? And are maybe wondering, graduated from my program, now what? Could you each share a little bit about your transitions from your master's programs into the AI workforce and how you secured your current role? Maybe we can start with Chloe, who talked a little bit about networking before.
Yeah, so I actually got this position because my supervisor at the time had heard there was an opening for this specific position. So yeah, I just want to stress the importance of networking. And like, if you're looking for jobs, like, let people in your network know, so you know they can keep an eye open if ever anything arises.
That's a great tip. Networking. How about you, Revthi?
I have to agree with Chloe. Networking is one big thing, but yeah, I actually replaced the person who referred me. So he was leaving and he said, "Oh, I know her. You know, we've talked a couple of times," and then he referred me. So networking for sure, and you have to put yourself out there. It can be really hard when you're just sitting at home during a pandemic to reach out to other people and learn about their lives. You might not care, but you really have to, because there's just that one conversation will teach you so much, and you can talk about it just for the next years to come. So I guess those two are my main.
Great. How about you, Stephen?
Yeah, so networking for sure. So I want to add so that I think it's very important to have a good online presence nowadays, meaning your own good website, the project you did, or the open source project you contributed. So all of these will help you, will make you more visible to potential recruiters or companies. So for me, the co-founder saw my website and really liked what I did. And so we started chatting. So yeah, that's my tip.
That's a great tip. And over to you, Ed.
Yeah, I'd like to kind of echo what Stephen just said, but when I was doing my master's, I was working full-time at IBM at the same time. So I was in some sense already working in the AI space while going through my program. It just so happened that Google reached out to me. So, you know, when Stephen's talking about having the right online presence, making sure you're demonstrating what your projects are, what the results of those projects are, demonstrating the pedigree of the education you're now going through or going to go through, are all things that recruiters are looking for, right? So as I mentioned earlier, there's a skills gap in this market for sure. It's really about how you're going to demonstrate that you are of high value enough that people will reach out to you even.
Yeah, that's a great tip. So it's a great transition over to Layla's question, which is, while you were applying for jobs, did you have a portfolio of your projects as well as your resume? And what did you include in your portfolio to showcase what you've worked on in terms of your online presence? So what information did you include? Did you make your code available? Maybe you can give some pointers on your online presence to the audience today. So maybe we'll start back with Stephen, because you brought this up first.
Yeah, so for me, there were many different things. For example, I converted a project from a school course project into an archive paper. So that's one thing. And then I also wrote some Medium articles. And also I really share the code on GitHub. So that will increase your visibility as well. Yeah, that's it.
Great. And how about you, Advait?
So I guess let me teach you guys to think about how to hack the AI algorithms that are trying to find you, right? So there's clearly some keywords that they're looking for in terms of frameworks that you're skilled in, certain languages that you know. I'm hoping you guys are all aware of what those are, as well as the types of projects in NLP or time series analysis and specific approaches that people are really looking to see that you've actually dived in with certain level of depth. That's going to get your foot in the door. That's going to maybe get you an interview. Then you need to be able to back that up with a certain level of depth. So I've also too often seen people who list a resume full of keywords that sounds like they should know what they're talking about, and that clearly falls flat when we have a face-to-face conversation. So make sure you're backing up what you claim to know with what you actually know.
Yeah, that's a great tip to make sure that you can actually do what you say in your resume. How about you, Chloe?
So in my case, I had a research master, so I had a few research projects that I could talk about. So I mostly highlighted those in my resume. And yeah, I think like if you're going to list any projects in your resume, make sure you can talk about them in depth, answer any questions we have about them. Like we're interested in seeing like what went well, but also like what didn't go well. So make sure you're able to answer those questions and give us more details on that.
Great, and then Revthi.
Yeah, I have to agree with what everyone else just said. I had a website too. I still have a website. I did list, some similar to what Chloe said, the projects you know the best about and where you have really gone very deep in understanding what's happening and you know every inch of the project really well. So I highlighted those, and if there's so much more to talk about a single project, you can always put that on your website and direct them to that. Make sure you're putting the links everywhere. But yeah, and having a website, like everyone says to have it, but not many people do. So it will really help you build your brand that way.
That's a great tip. So now we have a question for some of you who are kind of working on research in your current role. So if you are able to work on research, what is that like in the current context of your jobs, especially for those who are graduating for more of a research or thesis-based master's program and want to continue that in some way after they graduate? I want to pass it over to Chloe because I know you do a little bit of that right now.
Yeah, so some of our projects will have kind of like a more research collaborator. So working with people from Vector, from U of T. And we try to always have student groups within like throughout the year. So like for a while we worked closely with like Marzia Gassemi's machine learning and healthcare course where they actually sent students in for like 2 or 3 months. And actually we had Steven come in for a bit. So I see you again. So yeah, so that's kind of like how we're kind of doing research. Yeah, like it's really project specific, and I think with healthcare and machine learning in general, there's an appetite for research. So we always have people coming in like wanting to do more, wanting to wrap things up as like papers.
That's great. So just a little bit of follow-up questions in terms of publications and all of those I know people are interested in. Could you speak a little bit to how you've had experience with that during your role so far?
Yes, I mean, if naturally, if the opportunity for a publication arises, we'll usually go for it. I'd say that in my experience, most of these have been driven by kind of like the students we're working with or by like the research collaborators we're working with. And it's really, I think it's really dependent on like the data scientists. It's how motivated they are, how, it really depends on who's driving that, yeah.
Great, thank you. And over to you, Stephen, because Chloe shouted you out. So could you speak a little bit to the role of research in your current role?
Yeah, so I think that there's many different ways to get involved in research and publishing. If you are in school, in a course, maybe the professor has some projects and some volunteer opportunities. That's how I got involved with the St. Michael's hospitals and with Chloe. And also, if you're working already or if you're doing an internship, usually companies, depend on the team, have the time or commitment for you to publish a paper as well while you're working, but you have to kind of talk to your team or your manager, make sure they are committed to that.
Great, thank you. Yes, that makes a lot of sense. Next is a question specifically for Advait. So someone asked, does having a non-computer science undergraduate and subsequently having a master's in an AI-related field affect how employers view you as a potential job candidate?
Well, I guess that kind of fits for me in that my undergraduate was in commerce. It was not in a technical or engineering or even computer science related field. I think if let's say you have a background in more of a harder science like a biology or physics, it adds a perspective, or even in business, right? It adds a certain perspective that employers do want. So don't be so married to the fact that, oh yeah, all my degrees have to be in engineering. That being said, there are going to be some people who are a little bit more old school or prejudiced in that sense, where they just want to see engineering degrees. But there are also organizations who specifically want to see people with a specialized breadth, right? They want to see people who have a healthcare background and machine learning background. And that might be an asset rather than a constraint, right? So just know how to market yourself best and who to market yourself best to you're not going to fit well with every single employer, but there are some people who are going to want you more than others based off of your varied backgrounds.
Great, thank you. Revthi, I have a question specifically for you. So as you completed an internship during your master's program, could you speak a little bit to how you found that role, as well as how the internship prepared you for your current role?
Of course. So I was a data scientist at a consulting company here in Toronto. It was actually really cool because they gave us so much ownership to do multiple portfolio projects, and I got involved in the whole thing, finding public data, and then all the way until getting the model working and then giving them insights and doing a presentation for the stakeholders, right? So it will teach you so much and give you so much exposure. Sorry, can you repeat the question? I feel like I'm missing a part of it.
Oh, so how did you feel your internship prepared you for your current role, and how did you go about finding it?
Oh yeah, of course. So for me, the internship, my program sort of just assigns it with different partners. So I didn't have to apply for the internship. So that way that was easier. And I found it really well because it really helped me understand how exactly at a workplace, how things work and how you should approach your solutions. And there's so much that you can learn from with people who are who've been in particular roles for like a year or two. You can see that gap in where you are right now and where you could be just by working with those people. So I think that really gave me some perspective that I would not have gotten just by sitting behind a laptop and working on my own.
Great, thank you. How about you, Stephen? I know that a long internship is built into your kind of program, so could you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, so I had a 8-month internship at Uber in Toronto. So the good thing about that versus a thesis-based master is that you do get a lot of hands-on experience with how to apply what you learned, hone your skills using all the machine learning framework and languages, and also just trying to see if you like what you're doing. Then you have the opportunity to decide what kind of field you want to, or specifically what kind of models you want to work on later on when you pursue a full-time job.
Great, thank you. We have a question I think is directed to everyone. Are there any books, resources, Stephen, you mentioned a course earlier, that you would recommend to someone to learn more and prepare themselves for the workforce, especially in AI? So I'll open the field up to all of you if you have any pro tips you would like to share with our audience here today.
Maybe less so on books, but more about keeping up to the state of the art, right? So there's always research blogs that are being posted. I know the Google AI research team publishes some of what's going on there. Start reading more and more about best practices that cloud providers write out when it comes to actually productionizing models. They may give you insights in terms of how you may want to start building your own stuff locally.
Great. Does anyone else have any resources?
So I'll add to, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'll add to that, reading, keep up to date with the latest research. I think you really, once you read a paper, if you really like it, it's a good opportunity to convert into a project. Maybe you can try to implement the models. This way, you'll gain visibility online and people might start looking into your code, and you'll get to get connected to a lot of people this way.
Great, thank you. So I think we'll take one or two more questions. And one of them is, now that you look back, that you're working in the workforce, most of you have been in your current roles for probably about a year now. What is a piece of advice that you would offer to students in their programs, or something that you wish you knew earlier on? Maybe we'll start with Chloe.
Put on the spot. I would say take every opportunity you can to make connections. And also for those of you that do have internship opportunities, like use that time to see if it's like during your internship, see if it's like a potential workplace that you would want to work at. So for example, for us, like one of our previous interns is not like a full-time employee, right? So it's a good way for like the company to assess the person, but also for you to assess like it would be somewhere where you'd like to work at. So Yeah, I think internship opportunities are awesome. It's just like 4 to 8 months, and then you get a good sneak peek at like what full-time would be like.
Yeah, for sure. Part of the internship experience is also understanding, as Chloe mentioned, whether that's some place you want to work at. So that's important to consider as well, because your dream job that you thought you might want might not be one you actually want once you started. And Melissa's also thrown some resources in the chat here for some places to keep up to date on the latest news, as well as some roles information. So there you have it. Advait, do you have any advice for us?
Sure. I mean, I guess I'll add on that many of your colleagues and co-students, at least in my scenario, ended up being, and even some of my professors and instructors became customers. So keep in touch with them, because the space of AI, and at least here in Canada and in the GTA particularly, is still pretty small, right? So get to know everybody, because there's going to be opportunities to either have a new role, have a potential business opportunity, have some partners. That's always there. The other thing that I would say is, just because you're done your program doesn't really mean that you're done learning, nor does that necessarily mean that you're ready for moving from research to more practical engineering, right? So there's always little things that you need to build out on that a program is not focused on, and that's outside of the scope of the program. So keep learning, because there's always more to know.
Sure, that's great advice. And how about you, Revthi?
I think for me, I knew how important networking was, and I was not used to it. So, I had thought, oh, maybe in the fall term, I'll start networking. But so it took me a while until I realized how that should be just a natural part of my lifestyle. Like, I should always be looking to learn more about people, making connections, and, just making those networking connections in a very regular and consistent manner. It shouldn't be a task. It took me a while to reach that point where it was like, yeah, this is just normal part of my day. I'm on LinkedIn for like 2 hours. So just try to, instead of looking at it as a task, just try to make it a regular part of your day. And I think that will really help you mentally, and also obviously for jobs, and just to learn about what's happening in this AI world.
Great tip, thank you. And to close us out, over to you, Stephen.
I think for me, a tip when people apply for jobs, especially their first job, is to try not to chase companies or names. Instead, try to look for people and project where you can learn and actually do what you're interested in and develop that experience. And because companies, once you have mastered what you do, you can always go whenever you want. So yeah, that's my tip.
Great, thank you all for your incredible insights today. I think that's all the questions we'll be taking for today. Thanks for your speakers for sharing your unique perspectives, and thanks to our audience for joining us for today's event. As an FYI, we will be setting out a survey after this event so that you can share your feedback. We're always trying to improve and have new ideas for future topics. So please remember to fill that out once you get it after today. And just as an FYI, we'll be hosting an information session with BMO on June 3rd, featuring internship and co-op opportunities. So we encourage you to sign up, especially for those of you who are curious about internships and career pathways. So the link to register is in our chat below, and we hope to see you there. And everyone, thanks again and have a great day.